Christchurch terrorist attack in 2019, that inclusion and rapid response was vital. How does that play into the idea of protecting multilateralism, and what did you see in the meetings that lead you to believe we can do the same here when it comes to cybercrime, Your Excellency?
Thank you very much, George, and I want to salute my dear sister here. Let me first salute and congratulate Khadim al-Haramaini, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Saud, and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Prime Minister. Now I want to switch in French to be sure that...
You make me smile because your English is so good, but I understand diplomacy.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, la cybersécurité, nous l'avons vu dans le film tout à l'heure, est une pratique mondiale, elle est globale, puisque la cybercriminalité ne connaît pas les frontières. Je salue les efforts de l'Arabie Saoudite, le Royaume d'Arabie Saoudite, pour avoir eu l'idée d'instituer ce Global Cybersecurity Forum. Parce que c'est une problématique majeure qui ne peut être résolue que par la coopération. La coopération entre États et les tech qui sont les responsables des plateformes. Et justement, j'ai en souvenir l'appel de Christchurch. Après cette attaque terroriste, le 15 mars 2019, à Christchurch, où on a attaqué 2 mosquées et tué plus de 51 personnes. Et cet attentat a été programmé et montré en live. À la suite de cette tragédie, il y a eu une action commune immédiatement qui a été faite 2 mois exactement après les attentats, le 9 mai 2019, à l'Élysée, à l'invitation du président Emmanuel Macron, qui a co-organisé avec la première ministre d'alors de la Nouvelle-Zélande. Et plusieurs pays se sont joints immédiatement, dont le Royaume-Uni, le Canada, le Sénégal et d'autres, mais également la présence des big tech, qu'on appelle les GAFAM, ils étaient là, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, etc. Pour avoir une action commune entre États et plateformes numériques majeures, pour réguler les contenus qui entraînent la haine, qui promeuvent la haine, ou en tout cas pouvoir réagir par la régulation et au besoin l'arrêt de propagande terroriste à travers les réseaux. Donc on voit bien que si nous développons la coopération, nous pouvons arriver à des résultats tangibles. Et c'est ça l'apport du GCF. Déjà, c'est devenu un forum global, mais il faut que l'ensemble des États, et c'est pourquoi je salue le partenariat avec les Nations Unies et Antonio Guterres, au passage, doivent permettre à partir de Riyad d'avoir une plateforme mondiale qui inclut l'ensemble des nations, aussi l'ensemble des grands utilisateurs des plateformes numériques, la société civile, pour au moins sur des thématiques comme la protection des enfants et le renforcement des capacités des femmes dans la cybersécurité, que nous puissions ensemble convenir de conventions et de lois qui permettent de réguler et surtout de neutraliser les menaces terroristes ainsi que tous les fléaux qui utilisent justement le développement de ce numérique et qui utilisent aussi l'intelligence artificielle. Ne serait-ce que par rapport à la perspective de l'intelligence artificielle, il serait bien que GIF soit transformé dans cette perspective en une grande organisation mondiale qui va s'occuper et réguler ces sujets. Je voudrais m'en arrêter là.
Thank you, President Sall. I'm glad you made reference to it because you talked about the UN Convention on Cybercrime with 125 nations that have signed on, which is quite a big leap forward. You layered in AI, which is the great opportunity in terms of knowledge power around the world, but it's also the greatest threat when it comes to cybercrime. Chris Inglis, you know this from the front row seat at the White House, doing this work from 2021 to 2023. And I'd love to get your thoughts about models for international success. And you said something very profound. When we get stuck in this idea of multilateralism and we're trying to move countries along, we forget who our end user is, our customer, if you will, the voters of the world, people who live and want to prosper. How do you put it, this policy in to be people-centric, if you will, Chris?
Yeah, well, John, thank you for the question. And I join my distinguished colleagues in thanking the GCF and His Royal Highness for convening this very powerful group of people who represent not just ideas, but the collective action of peoples across national boundaries, which is so very important. In answering the question, I think I would focus on the central theme of this conference, which is cohesion. That's not merely trying to mobilize concurrent actions of a disparate group of people or nations, but rather to mobilize collaboration, which is to center and focus on the most common aspirations, the most common needs. We should not then focus on those who would hold us at risk. There is a time and a place for that, but rather focus on the needs of our citizens. As Her Excellency, I think so deftly said, if we focus on those aspirations, we're more likely to find common ground. We're more likely to discover that we are not trying to solve similar problems, but we're trying to address the same problems, if not the same aspirations. And by focusing on that, we're therefore more likely to have the mobilization of the collaboration that's required, where we'll make the investments, not simply because we're trying to wake up tomorrow morning to reduce the number of attacks, but to advance the interests of citizens. And there's nothing more fundamental, there's nothing more collaborative than that.
Can I focus in on child protection? We heard in the opening ceremony with Rebecca that it is a global initiative led by His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, and the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to take care of children as a priority right now. You talked about people-centric behavior. President Sall brought it up too. This should be our kind of front line. And you bring the tech giants, whether they're in Silicon Valley or they're sitting in Singapore, to the table, private sector, public sector. And you said something very interesting when we had our conversation together, that often they have the same goals, but they go about it in a different way.
Well, I think that identifying child protection, and a huge credit to GCF for identifying that as one of the primary issues going forward, there's nothing more universal than that. There's nothing more inspiring than that. Any two people, regardless of their backgrounds, when they get together, almost certainly begin by saying something about their respective families. We need to deliver for our children a world in which they can have confidence, they can depend upon the digital infrastructure that will meet their needs, that will meet their expectations for safety, for economic vitality, for a world in which we would want them to live. And I think that it's powerful if we, in fact, try to solve those problems together. There's nothing more transformative than combining our efforts and actually doing real work. And I think addressing that together in a collaborative fashion, bringing cohesion to the table, is going to be, I think, a very vital, viable path forward.
Good. President Clinton, I'd love to talk to you about this idea of layering on AI, as I suggested in my opening comments here. It's a great opportunity, $3 trillion deployed already, whether it comes to the energy for artificial intelligence or software development. Everybody sees it as a race, even a competition between the number 1 and 2 economies, the US and China, around the world. How do you make multilateralism work in this context? Because it's not easy to set governance for AI. And I think, for example, the GCC, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, serves as a great bridge between East and West. But so far, we don't see people embracing regulation for AI. And how do you get that sort of collaboration that Chris is talking about?
Yes, you're absolutely right. The interest in the AI is so diverging from completely letting the private sector have open hands to, on the other hand, complete state control over what happens in AI. I believe that we will need regulation because AI presents many opportunities, but also many challenges and dangers. And in order to look at what we're doing and make it sort of future-proof, so to say, we need to have an approach that starts from the premise, how do we make our treaties, how do we make our agreements future-proof so that they don't expire like yesterday's software. And the technology moves a lot faster than diplomacy does. So diplomacy needs to catch up. And how do we do that? First and foremost, we need to follow that. We need to establish panels that monitor groups of experts, groups of specialists that include also representatives of the industry, representatives of the governments. We can take the example of the United Nations setting up the expert panel on artificial intelligence to monitor what will be going on with respect to the AI and how it will reflect upon everything UN is doing, so on all the aspects of our lives, and that is a good way forward. Now, when we look at treaties that will be in cyberspace that need to take into account future developments, we have to focus not on the specific technology, not on the gadgets, but we need to focus on principles, processes. So again, the principles need to be the principles that we all agree on, and that is protecting societies, protecting communities, protecting families, and the principles of cooperation. And the processes that need to be embedded is that we have review processes, that we provide for potential for agreements to be changed in the future through annexes rather than renegotiating agreements. And in addition to that, we can use the best practice from many different fora, from the EU and NATO, for instance, with centers of excellence, with joint exercises, with exchanging information, and building that into this review process that is actually creating a habit of constant consultation and a 360-degree view of what is going around us, both the challenges and the opportunities, both government and the private sector, and of course, it all reflects on the entire society.
Okay, this is an excellent conversation. We have 11 minutes left, and I want to get at least another round with you, and there's very vital questions on the table. Chris, I'll go a little bit short. You talked to me, and I always said to my wife when I'm doing sessions at the GCF, I always learn something, the OODA loop, and I think it applies. President Kalinda was saying here, how do you structure reaction to the cybercrimes of today and then plan, as you said, that the software doesn't phase out and we don't have the right policy years from now, the OODA loop?
John, thank you very much for the question. The OODA loop, that's an acronym. You'll know I'm from the United States because I use acronyms. But what it's for is that in any human endeavor, the party, the person, the organization, or the nation that can observe, that can orient, that can decide, that can act in the most efficient fashion typically wins the race. And in cyberspace, none of us, no one of us has an intact OODA loop. No one of us can observe, can understand the context of that observation, can decide and act alone. The fracturing across those four functions, the basic functions, is so profound that only collaboration is the right way forward. We must reduce the propensity to try to do this in a siloed fashion and actually collaborate using our common observations, common orientation, our common decision, our power to act. All of that must be brought to bear so that we collaborate. To try to do this in silos is a fool's errand.
Okay, President Sall, this is a very vital issue. I'm very passionate about it for energy and energy access for the global south, particularly Africa. But when it comes to cybersecurity, there's also a huge gap, right? We say mind the gap on the London Underground between the train and the platform. $30 per capita spent in the industrialized countries of the world on cybersecurity. $1 or less, according to reports from the GCF, the World Bank, and Interpol. They have one common agreement here, and that is we have to address the gap. So concretely here, should this be an agenda issue for the World Bank, where you actually have a line item and say, if we don't address cybersecurity, they're going to slide further back and not move forward with the opportunities that are there from the digital economy and embraced by Africa? How would you approach this to say we need to address it more aggressively when it comes to funding?
Merci beaucoup. Il y a en effet un gap très important, un gap numérique entre les pays développés et les pays en développement, en particulier l'Afrique. Et les chiffres que vous avez donnés sont édifiants. 30 $ par habitant dans les pays développés sont consacrés au développement au numérique, pendant que dans les pays en développement, on est à moins de 1 $. Et cela crée une telle disparité que si elle n'est pas réduite, évidemment, les plus faibles vont entrer vers le bas, les plus forts, puisque la cybercriminalité ne connaît pas les frontières. Et on peut voir les conséquences sur l'économie mondiale. Imaginons-nous un instant New York sans électricité pendant une journée, ce qui est tout à fait dans l'ordre du possible, ou ce qui a été récemment en Europe, où pratiquement tous les aéroports ont été bloqués en quelques heures, entraînant une conséquence mondiale de l'action qui a été faite. Donc, la cyberdiplomatie devrait pouvoir aider, et GCF peut être le ciment pour constituer cette organisation dont nous avons besoin pour collaborer ensemble sur, d'une part, la nécessité d'arrêter les fléaux tels que nous l'avons évoqué tantôt, mais aussi de renforcer les capacités dans les pays en développement, de les aider dans la formation des jeunes, des femmes, et surtout de faciliter l'augmentation de la connectivité. Puisque en Afrique, il y a encore beaucoup de pays qui ont très peu de fibres optiques. Alors que la 4G, la 5G est pratiquement partout sur le continent, on peut combiner l'effet des satellites et la fibre optique pour avoir une couverture sur l'ensemble du territoire. Et là, on aura besoin de ce qu'on appelle un leapfrog, c'est-à-dire on n'est pas obligé de faire tout le chemin. On peut juste être connecté en ce moment avec le monde dans cette troisième révolution du numérique, mais surtout dans le développement de l'IA. Et je rappelle que l'Afrique peut venir aussi avec sa jeunesse, avec sa main-d'œuvre, puisqu'elle fait aujourd'hui 1,4 milliard d'habitants, qui sont projetés à 2,5 milliards, 2,5 billion people in 2050. Donc, cette population jeune a besoin d'être dans le numérique, dans le codage, dans ce qu'on appelle les STEM, le système de l'enseignement des mathématiques, des sciences, de l'ingénierie. Et cela permettra effectivement d'apporter une plus dans le concert des nations, puisqu'il faudra beaucoup de cerveaux pour avoir toute cette surveillance sur le net, que ce soit pour la cybersécurité, ou tout ce que l'on veut. Il faudra des ressources humaines que l'Afrique pourrait contribuer, en tout cas à apporter. Et pour terminer, il faut de la coopération. Il faut de la coopération, il faut de la coopération pour réguler les plateformes. Et ce n'est pas seulement l'affaire des États. Ce sont les États, mais c'est également les grandes plateformes numériques, c'est le secteur privé, ce sont les citoyens. Ensemble, nous pourrons avoir un monde où le numérique sera au cœur de toutes nos préoccupations, au cœur des activités humaines, mais, comme le disait un penseur historique, Rabelais, science sans conscience n'est que ruine de l'âme. Le développement de l'IA, s'il n'est pas contingenté, s'il n'est pas contrôlé, en tout cas, ou régulé, il pourra avoir des conséquences très fâcheuses sur l'humanité. Il est temps d'agir, et je pense qu'à partir de Riyad, nous pouvons faire cet appel, comme nous avons suivi l'appel de Christchurch. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very, very much. It's interesting you said the leapfrogging. The estimates show through the GCF research adding 500 million Africans into the digital sphere, and they need protection as they do so. And the average age of 19 creates a lot of opportunity for aging populations in Europe, as you know, Ms. President. Can we address that in the context of women in cyber? This was up at the opening ceremony. key priority for the Crown Prince and Prime Minister here in Saudi Arabia. The gap, again, is big. 2.8 million jobs that are left unfilled today, and that looks like a great opportunity. What's your experience in Europe and in Croatia on steering this generation of women to see the opportunity and get the curriculums in that space for STEM studies, and do so at a faster pace? Be cognizant of time. We have 3 minutes left.
Yes, of course. This is an excellent topic of most importance. And I'm very happy, and I congratulate His Highness the Crown Prince for starting the initiative, because we really need women in STEM. What we see in Croatia and in many other countries is that from very early on, girls lag behind boys in digital literacy. So we have to start there. Secondly, we need to encourage girls and women to go into STEM, because sometimes we try to help them and then we give them false advice. Why would you go to a male-dominated field? Why don't you become a teacher? It's going to be a lot easier for you with a profession where there are more women. But that's absolutely untrue, because if we leave half of our society behind, we leave half of the talent behind. So including women and every person, as is that it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. As working and not including half of our society is like working with half of our brain.
Interesting. Very quickly, if I may, it's fascinating. This is where the private sector could have a key role, because they're filling jobs for the future for themselves. And where I've seen public-private partnerships work is where they say to the private sector, what are we missing? Do you agree, and that's the best way to speed this up?
Yes, absolutely, but also governments as well, because we miss women both in boardrooms and in government decision-making rooms and around the decision-making table. So we need to include women. And I have witnessed processes, including the formation of the government in Croatia, where there's a list of officials, and then somebody says, oh, we need women there. So we still principally think about men, and we have to extend that to the best and the most qualified persons possible. But in order to do that, again, we need to educate, encourage, and support girls and women in the process.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to give you the final word in this session, because we're nearly out of time, and I don't want to step into a huge controversy, but I'm curious what we learned from the Russia-Ukraine, that we've seen now going into its 4th year. I was at a private session recently with an advisor to the president that said they, because of the threat, they had to move quickly, both in cyber and in defense. And what can we learn in cybersecurity from what you've seen in the conflict?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think we can all say that we've been inspired by the Ukrainian efforts to defend their very existence over the last 3 years. And as much as we've seen what's happened on a physical battlefield, there's been a very stout kind of conflict taking place in cyberspace, and the Ukrainians have prevailed there. And how have they done it? They made modest investments in their technical architecture. Any system of interest today depends upon not just the technology, but the second thing that they've invested in is their skills, their human skills. And they've used every talent in the room. Without regard to the backgrounds of those people, they've used every head. But the third, and I think the thing that is most impressive, is what the Ukrainians have done is to develop and deploy a coalition of co-defenders, not co-combatants, but co-defenders across the private sector, across many nations, and of course across their own society. And as Digital Minister Fedorov told me recently, he said, but the most important thing is the 4th thing, which is to remember what cyberspace is for. To know that the citizens that we actually serve have aspirations and needs, and we wake up every morning focusing on that, so that we can establish the forward initiative and get away from the idea that we would simply wait for someone to hold us at risk and respond to that. I think the initiative of the GCF is so very powerful in declaring what we want to deliver to our citizens without regard to nationality or coalition.
Good. I always learn from you, Chris, and one thing you said to me when we had that brief discussion is that we're learning through this process that defense can lead to victory. Everybody thinks it's the offender that wins the battle. What can we learn from defense and cybersecurity, would you say?
Perhaps defense is the new offense, and actually articulating and supporting the needs of our citizens collectively will mobilize that cohesive coalition going forward that the GCF has called for.
Okay, very good. I wanted to ask President Sall about this, but we're a bit short on time. I want to encourage participants, both in the public and private roundtable, to talk to you about your new book, which came out 2 weeks ago, Africa Lead from the Heart. You led Senegal for 12 years. As I noted to His Excellency last night, have followed energy, and the offshore facilities for gas and oil, LNG for Europe, are game changers, but he's challenges in the cyber front there. But he talks in his book in a very profound way about the opportunity of Africa. And I always said we devoted so much money to COVID-19, right, in the response, but we didn't get it to the developing world fast enough. We're seeing the same pattern in AI, and he addresses these challenges for the future, but the African prism, which I think is so important with the average age on the continent of 19. My daughter said, you know, that President Kalinda, she's like a girl boss. So you are leading by example. Chris, it's always a pleasure. Can we give a nice applause to all three of our panelists? It's really nice to see you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Excellent. We'll lead you back down to the stage, please. Your Royal Highness, Prince Faisal bin Bandar bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, who's thanking our VIP members of the first panel today. It was a delight to have him. I know he has a very packed
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this panel discussion titled Reinforcing the Links, Securing Global Energy Supply Chains, moderated by Nilai, international moderator and journalist. Our panelists are Robert M. Lee, CEO and co-founder, Agus Incorporation, Saeed Saeed, Chief Executive Officer, Sabrani, Chase Carpenter, Chief Security Officer, Honeywell.
Assalamu alaikum, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's so good to be with you. We're going to be talking about securing energy supply chains. You have been here this morning. Excellent interview with Mr. Al-Khawater from with John Defterios, talking about how important it is that we make sure that cybersecurity is deeply embedded in operational technology right across the Aramco supply. We're going to take that discussion further. So, who should we start with? How about Chase Carpenter? So you're the Chief Security Officer for Honeywell. You're responsible for security within Honeywell, as well as making sure that all the products you supply, your customers, including Aramco, are super safe. So we're seeing an increasing merger between operations technology, OT, which used to be sealed off, if you like, with IT, which is bringing all sorts of new threats. What are you seeing particularly at the moment?
You know, that separation that we'll be able to rely on is so important. We're seeing such a massive increase in attacks in this space right now. In the first half alone, we saw a 148% increase in attacks on operational technology. And in the past, companies were able to rely, or organizations were able to rely on the fact that these environments were really isolated from the rest of the environment, the rest of the network. We've seen such a change in technology over the last 5 years, where now these systems require connectivity to the internet to share data for troubleshooting. They allow contractors or vendors to be able to connect in remotely to perform maintenance. We have connectivity from OT systems into IT and enable new business scenarios. But with all that new connectivity comes this increased risk of threat. And what we're seeing right now is I think companies are starting to make that shift where they're starting to think about how we protect our OT environments. We can no longer rely purely on isolation, but there's room still to go. And I think that's probably the thing that we're seeing now is people starting to recognize the importance of new sets of security controls that are different than what we do in the IT space, but additive to protecting these environments.
Thanks very much for getting us going, Chase. Mr. Saeed, so Cyber is a subsidiary of Aramco, which is one of your clients in turn, but you also supply other companies, other industries. So you can give us an overview of energy and also what's going on elsewhere. So I want to ask you, how is it that we're able to create a situation in which the energy sector can take the front foot